think they will get leery of us and keep a closer eye on us and be looking for a misstep that would give them some reason to step in again and say, I don't think you're on the right path. I think we better tell you what that path should be. But I think as long as we stay the course with those programs that have been developed as a part of the consent decree, we'll be okay.
I think that's a very helpful answer and a hopeful answer, but it seems to me that we are at the mercy of whether the city maintains its stormwater system adequately to take care of the water, the wet events. Do we work with them, coordinate with them to make sure that we don't end up in another situation where we get blamed and our customers get hit because the city may not have been able to keep up with its capacity?
The city has its own NPDES permits now, so they are liable to EPA much as we are. They are under a greater regulatory burden of their own now, more so than they were then. Frankly, I think at the time, part of the burden we were under was because they were not there yet. So yes, we continue to communicate with them. They're not making the kind of investment in the stormwater system, obviously, that we're making in the wastewater system. So that will continue to be a challenge. But the more we can do to make our system watertight, keep that water out of it, even during flooding events and flooding situations, the less of an impact they'll have. But there'll always be an impact.
Well, and please don't misunderstand me. I don't think it's an us versus them thing, despite the way I phrased the question. But I think it clearly it behooves us and our customers to make sure we're continuing to encourage the city to, through whatever means, to invest in the stormwater system, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation 10 years from now or 15 years from now where we're all suffering. And I don't think the city wants to do anything badly. I think they're just as concerned about our customers as we are.
Commissioners, as quickly as I can, I'm going to cover for you how we have funded much of the capital work that Mr. Elmore talked about in our Phase 10 and our Century 2 programs. I think it's been done in a balanced manner, using a combination of debt and rates and cost savings. And I think it's also been done in a fiscally responsible manner. And hopefully the charts I show you will bear that out. I wanted to start out by going back in time and actually discussing very briefly what our financial strategy, what our financial approach was prior to 2005, prior to the consent decree, because I think it's helpful and it provides some context of some of the changes and the evolution that took place in the past 10 to 12 years with our financial approach. So back in 2005 and in the 90s and leading up to that, our financial strategy in large part from a capital perspective was focused on funding growth. Believe it or not, we were one time adding sometimes more than 10,000 customers per year to our system back in the 1990s. Gas was leading the way. You saw the chart Mr. Elmore showed with that growth in miles of gas main. That was translating to new customers coming onto the system. And it wasn't unusual to add more than 5,000 customers. Gas was growing about 10% per year. So when looking at our capital funding plans, a large portion of that was focused on making sure the growth happened and providing for those new customers, which was also good because it was a new source of revenue for KUB as well to help pay for other projects and other expenses. It was also a time, and I think Mintha alluded to this earlier, and I remember with Larry, the mantra was, we're not having any rate increases. That was not going to happen. I remember being in his office one day and we were looking at financial plans and we were saying, well, we might need a rate increase, and his glasses come down and say, think again. So it was very unusual for that to occur. We did go an extended period of time without an electric rate increase, and you'll see in some of the charts, and almost an equal amount of time without increases in the other systems as well. And cost management, just like it is today, was very important back in that time, but we looked to find cost savings, primarily not to have any rate increases. That was the driving force back at that time. And then from a financial perspective on our debt and other factors, we were really looking to preserve financial flexibility for the future. Debt ratios were low, debt levels were relatively low, cash reserves were growing. And so that was sort of the backdrop of our strategy back then. But our business environment began to change significantly, starting in 2005 and with the consent decree. For our wastewater system, in a few short years, the amount of capital investment quadrupled for the wastewater system. So obviously there was upward pressure on capital investment in that way. A few short years later, as per the board's instruction, we were looking at our life cycle asset programs for our other systems. Century 2 was born, and it did get postponed a few years, but in the fall of 2011, it went into effect for electric and water and gas shortly thereafter that. So pressure from capital investment, again, for those systems. The economic recession, that was another game-changing event for us back in that decade, and because it really virtually caused our growth to come to a standstill. I've got a chart in just a minute that'll show that. So the revenue, those 10,000 new customers, 8,000 new customers we were adding, that was helping to fund programs. That source went away, basically, starting in 2009. And then there has been a long-term trend, actually goes back to the late 1990s, and we've talked about it several times, that every year our customers tend to use a little bit less of our services, both residential and business. More efficient appliances, looking at conservation, household demographics changing, businesses, process improvements, but each year using a little bit less, which also takes away some revenue as well. So a few slides that demonstrate some of that. This looks at how our capital budgets have changed over time. And we'll go back to 2004, the year before the consent decree. Our total capital budget was around $66 million. 16 million of that was for the wastewater system. In 2 short years, the capital budget had grown to $128 million, so almost doubled. And the wastewater portion of that was $68 million, so it had more than quadrupled from 16 to 68 million. So the effect of the consent decree, you actually see it in the capital budgets here. Well, years go along, Century 2, you see another upward spike in capital spending. We spent $152 million in capital in 2012, and then went along the South Loop project for gas. You can see how that shows there. But our current year, fiscal year 2017 budget is $184 million total. You take that back and compare it to 13 years earlier, that's an increase of $118 million, or 180% in capital spending. So a significant increase in impact on our financial plans. Looking quickly at our customer growth, I mentioned that we had rather strong, extensive growth. This chart goes back to 1998. It was actually the first year here. We added 10,300 new customers in 1998. And you can see how it began to trend down and would come back up. But with the recession in 2009, it dropped significantly to below 1,000 customers. And then in 2011, we actually experienced negative growth with a net reduction of 1,800 customers that year. It's come back a little bit. We were about close to 3,500 customers in 2016. One thing I think is interesting, if you do the math and add up how many we added in the 8 years leading up to the recession, that was a total of 55,000 new customers, about 7,000 a year. In the 8 years since the recession, that's a total of 13,000, so less than 2,000 a year. That's less than, I guess, 25% of the same time period leading up to the 2009 recession. So that's significant and has an impact. I'm looking at customer use, and this shows the average residential usage for each of our 4 services, average monthly usage for residential customers, and you can see how for each one it has had a trend down going back to the late 1990s. For water and wastewater, over the past decade, there's been a decline of about 2% annually. So that's 2% less revenue coming in each year on those services. For electric, it's about 1%. For gas, it's about 1% over the last 10 years. Now, some good news in this is in the last 3 or 4 years, you begin to see the trends start to flatten out somewhat. So water and wastewater is about 1% per year. electric and gas about 0.5% annually. And about 3 or 4 years ago, we actually built this assumption into our long-term funding plans to account for that annual usage reduction. Before that, we were having to go back each year and we update our plans, take more revenue out, take more revenue out. Now we account for that. So hopefully it's flattened out, and hopefully it'll continue to flatten out even more. But amidst increases in capital investment, combined with some revenue reductions from less growth, less usage, staff had worked with the board over the last 10 to 12 years, and the financial approach, the financial strategy became modified. And modified to an extent that we still needed to balance our system needs with our customers' ability to pay. It is all about balance. So what changed in our approach? Really 4 things I'm going to talk about. Cost management was important prior to 2005. It's still important today, and I would say there's even a greater focus on managing our costs today. We even have a strategic initiative for operating efficiencies to help find dollars to save money for our customers. Higher levels of debt, we'll see that here in just a moment. It pretty much mirrors the capital chart, the growth in debt over time. And the board and staff have had a lot of discussions on that over the years, and basically we feel it is appropriate. It was appropriate and is appropriate to increase the use of debt, primarily for what Ms. Rhodes said earlier, that the assets that we're talking about here are going to be used by both current and future customers. It does make sense for those assets, the use of those assets, the cost of those assets to be paid by both current and future customers as well. Some of the assets we're talking about have useful lives extending out as far as 100 years. So we think that does make sense. Rate increases have been necessary to help fund these programs, obviously. And when we started out with the wastewater system, the first 2 increases were relatively large in nature. We had 2 50% wastewater rate increases to begin phase 10 in 2005 and 2007. That evolved into smaller increases every other year for wastewater. And now we're in a position with Century 2 that we actually have those smaller annual increases that we had that started back in 2011 with electric and water, sort of the dollar on the monthly bill each year, and wastewater and natural gas joined that. And the board actually approved 3 years of increases for all systems back in 2014. And then also a significant change was just expanding the planning horizon from 5 to 10 years for the reasons we've already talked about on that. But at the same time, those changes, we still have to maintain competitive and affordable rates for our customers. It's a big part of our vision statement. And we need to fund it and fund our systems in a fiscally responsible manner. The financial soundness, the long-term financial soundness of our systems is very important. So talk about cost savings just for a moment. Going back over the last, 13 years, how much have we saved? And we compared our actual operating costs to our budgets, and we've saved a total of $53 million. And I think that's pretty significant because every dollar we save is a dollar that our customers don't have to pay in rates to help fund expenses and capital programs. So funding $53 million is helpful for our customers. It's come from a variety of sources. Again, we've done a lot of efficiencies, a lot of improvements, and that's resulted in staffing levels having to be less in some areas than what we anticipated. So there's been savings there. I think we've done a very good job managing our benefit programs and our pension contributions. We're still contributing what we need to because we're 100% funded, but we've had saved a lot of money doing that. We've had a number of different workforce mix changes, some outsourcing to save money, and here recently some insourcing to save money, bringing work back from contractors. And we really evaluate all of those carefully to make sure that we're saving money for our customers. Bottom line, $53 million over about 12 years.
Mark,
Yes, ma'am.
would you say that the greatest savings have come from one pot, like the lower interest rates or refinancing, or is it kind of equal?
I think the greatest savings have come from staffing being less than anticipated, and also savings on the benefit programs, on the pension. We have actually had some strong investment performance in our post-employment expected. We did make a change, I guess back in 2012, we transitioned our pharmacy plan for retirees to Medicare Part D out of our base plan. And whereas their coverage stayed very solid and very good, but the cost to us dropped dramatically with that. And we've saved a lot of money and will continue to save a lot of money with that change that we made. So I think it's mostly on the labor-related side, but it's not all that way. And debt service has also played a role as well. Good question. Looking at how debt has changed over the timeline, so I mentioned it probably in some ways mirrors that capital chart I showed. But let's go back to 2004. We had $280 million in total outstanding debt for all four systems combined. And that included $55 million for wastewater. This is the principal amount of bonds, not the interest included, but just the principal. And you can see how that's changed over time. You look at 2006, and when we started phase 10, not only did we have the 250% wastewater rate increases, we had $140 million bond issue as well to start out. So that was by far the largest we'd ever had. And for one system at least. And then you go on, what is the outstanding debt level today in the current year? At the end of fiscal year 2017, it's going to be $1,040,000. So the debt levels have grown significantly as well. Wastewater system is around $500 million, or about half of the outstanding debt. So it's really grown almost at a factor of 10 times over this period of time. But I'll say this, the growth in debt has somewhat been propelled by the decline in market interest rates, which has obviously worked to our advantage with respect to interest costs. And you can see, this is a chart that shows municipal bond rates going back to 1970, and there's a high, low, and an average. But you can see how the average has been trending down over time until it's right around 3% in 2016. We also talked to the board about last month, we just sold about $100 million in bonds back in July. Those are maturities that go out as far as 30 years for all four series, and those rates were in the 2.7% range. And that's a level that's actually off of this chart here. So it's worked to our advantage, but it's also one of the reasons we've been able to use greater levels of debt to help fund our Century 2 and Phase 10 programs, this decline in interest rates. It's also provided an opportunity for us to refinance some of our older debt at lower interest rates. And in the last 4 years alone, we've refinanced a little under $400 million, actually $370 million at lower interest rates. And you can see the savings there, over $46 million over the life of the bonds. And again, I'll make the point, that's $46 million that won't have to be paid by our customers. And that helps with the level of bills. You might think that because our levels of debt have elevated over time, that the financial condition is less healthy than it was before we began to raise the debt. And I'd say that I really don't believe that's true. I think actually our financial systems are probably in a stronger state than they were back in 2003, 2004. You can see these columns here show bonds. You can see the level of debt has increased. Debt ratios have increased. Wastewater somewhat significantly. Gas has actually gone down a little bit. The story with that is that even though the other systems had relatively low debt levels back before 2005, gas was growing so much, debt was used to help fund the growth of the gas system. Debt coverages were very high in 2004. You can see they have dropped, but they're still very strong levels in 2017. You go back to 2004, almost a coverage of 5, it was like, wow. You're creating a lot to cover a relatively low level of debt. But the big indicator that I think speaks to the financial soundness and the financial health of the systems, and we've talked about it earlier, are the bond ratings. And these ratings show both Moody's and Standard & Poor's and Moody's for 2004 and now currently in 2017. Each system has received an upgrade, as Mintha mentioned earlier, and electric has received an upgrade from both of the agencies. Gas has received only one upgrade, and that is from Moody's. But I'll point out that S&P makes this point to us every time we talk and ask for an upgrade. They say AA is the highest we give for a natural gas system. Water has received multiple upgrades from both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. They've gone from AA to AAA and AA3 to AA1 over this period of time. And wastewater, with this tenfold increase in debt and a debt ratio more than doubling, has actually received 2 upgrades over that period of time. And I think that does speak volumes. We've shown you a couple of quotes from recent rating agency reports. I think I showed it to you last month. I'd like to show it again. I think it does speak volumes about the financial health of the systems, but it really does more than that. And I want to make sure you understand that when the rating agencies look at KUB and when they evaluate us to assign a rating, they're not just looking at our balance sheet, they're not just looking at the income statement, they're not just looking at the 10-year financial plan. They're examining the utility operations, what we have going on in plants and our distribution systems, the projects, Century 2. They're looking at our reliability. They're looking at management, the decisions management makes. And they're also looking at the board and our governance and the board's willingness to raise rates if necessary, the board's commitment to funding these programs and doing so in a fiscally responsible manner. So they pointed out to us several times, and one of those quotes speaks to it, but it's really the board and your commitment to funding the programs and doing so in a responsible fashion that is responsible for the high ratings. So it's really you want to say it's a strong, high grade, high quality grade. It's not just for the finances of the systems, it's for the systems in total and for all of KUB. Rates. Rates also instrumental in funding both programs. Again, we talked about wastewater. We had some large ones to start out. They moderated over time. We've evolved into the smaller annual rate increases. One thing that we've done in the last 5 or 6 years, you'll recall we've talked a lot about on residential and small commercial, when we have the rate increases, allocating those to the fixed monthly charges as opposed to the commodity charges. That helps address that decline in use that we've seen on the various systems. You're seeing that that's not just something KUB is doing. Utilities across the nation on how they recover their costs are doing more of that shift to fixed monthly charges. So that's something that we'll be talking to the board about when we consider future rate increases, whether we want to continue that, moderate that somewhat, or not. Commissioners, really the next series of slides are going to talk about the rate actions that KUB boards have taken really over the last 20 years for each of the 4 systems, and I'll show you how much we've added to the average monthly residential bill going back to 1997 for all 4 systems. Before I do that, though, I did want to just sort of put a reminder up here or a view of our residential customer mix for KUB. To show that of our households that are in our service territory, who gets what services. And I know this is something that I think Eddie has in his presentations when he shows in the Commissioner Orientation Notebook, if you remember. But when we were talking about this a few weeks ago, trying to think, okay, how many of our customers have all 4 services, residential customers? I was sitting there thinking, well, I think that's a decent amount. And Eddie said, well, I'm not so sure. So we pulled out the chart, and 17%. Only 17% of the residential households, I guess out of 193,000 in our service area, have all 4 services now. So I want to make sure you understand that as we go through these charts. So we'll start with electric service. And basically, going back to 1997, through rate actions that the KUB board has adopted, we've added about, $11, I think it's $10.75, on average 50 cents to the average monthly bill, for residential electric customers. I think it's important to take a longer term perspective. I didn't just look back to when Century 2 started or 2000 and the last 10 years. I think it's important to take a longer perspective. And I say that because the function of what's taken place here is in part related to what's gone on in the past and not having any rate increases for a long period of time and not having an even period of capital investment over that period of time. You can see in the years from 97 to 2011, the average capital investment for the electric system was $26 million. Since Century 2, in the last 6 years, we've averaged $65 million. So a significant increase, and part of these rates have gone to help fund that, just like part of the debt issue, or the debt issues have gone to help fund that as well. I'll point out, and I think Mentha mentioned this, 2003, we had a 4% electric rate increase. That was the first increase in 12 years. So I think it's important to take that long-term look. But you probably wonder, how do our residential electric rates compare with others? We compare them to the other largest TVA distributors, the so-called Big Eight. And based upon the average monthly bill for fiscal year 2016, our customers pay on average $102 a month for their electric service. That's based upon 1,000 kilowatt hours monthly usage. And we were the third lowest among the group of 8.
Mark, before we get too far,
Yes, ma'am.
I've got a question about this residential customer mix. I was just studying that. Is the reason that more households don't have gas services because we don't have the lines run to their particular neighborhoods?
I think, go ahead.
I think it's a combination. If you look at our service territory, we cover all of Knox County, but we do not have the density of lines out in the rural areas that we have otherwise. Also, I think a factor of that is just the difference in service territories. Electric being much larger than any other territory. So it's a combination of the way the service territories overlap and the density of lines in the system, particularly in those rural areas.
Is there a way, now that our loop is completed, that we can efficiently offer services in areas where we hadn't before?
We can provide that service with or without those loop lines. It's just making it economic. The problem is, again, the density or lack of density. We stand ready today to extend services to any neighborhood, any community, if they wish to have it. It's just that trying to get them to sign up and enough people to sign up to cover the cost and make it economically feasible is difficult unless you have a dense development coming online very close to your existing system.
And many of those customers many of them already have electric service. So they really don't have the economic incentive to say, okay, I'm going to help pay to bring the gas lines into my neighborhood when my electric units are working okay. Now, some of those that are on their last legs or only have a few years to go, they might say, well, it is more economical and I would like to see that happen because I think I can maybe save money with lower cost gas service.
Another factor is the gas lines are there. There's a gas line on my street, I'm a gas customer. The guy right across the street from me had always been electric, it's a 60, 70-year-old house, and only when it was sold and renovations were being done did the new owner decide to add gas. So it's a choice, and if you already have electric, it may cost you $200 to get the gas line extended, but you got to buy new appliances, new hot water heater, the whole thing. So it's many places it's there, and people just choose not to do it.
Commissioners, on our electric rates, we also compared our rates to a recent national survey for electric rates for all across the United States. And actually, it was rates in effect as of May of 2016. And our monthly bill for May of this year was $100 based upon 1,000 kilowatt hours, so 10 cents per kilowatt hour. But our data source calculated the average for each state in the United States. And you look at that average, it was 12.8 cents. So that translates to a monthly bill of $128. So just looking at KUB, we're $28 or about 22% less than the national average. I also think it's interesting to note that when you look at the average of each of the individual states, there's only 2 states that have an average cost of residential power less than the city of Knoxville, or KUB, and that being the state of Washington and Louisiana. And both of those states have have relatively low cost sources of power generation, Washington, the majority of theirs is hydro because of their location with the Bonneville Power Administration and all the dams up there. And also in the state of Louisiana, natural gas, which is relatively low cost these days.
And this is an area, I assume that where we benefit from TVA.
It is.
Yes.
Good point. TVA relatively low cost as well, and you can see in some of the states where some of TVA will serve part of, I guess that's Alabama, but you also have Southern Company serving portions of these states as well. But pretty much in Tennessee, it's all TVA. Moving on to gas service, again going back over 20 years, what have rate actions added to the average residential bill? It is a little over $12, about 60 cents per year for gas service. I'll point out again that first increase over this period of time was in 2003, and that was the first increase going back to 1995, so a period of 8 years. You see the average capital investment, it has doubled over that period of time from $13 million to $26 million. And really since Century 2 started, we've probably added $6 of that $12 to the monthly bill. All of these, until we get to wastewater, are going to tell pretty much a similar story. On our gas rate comparisons, we compared to local distribution companies that have the same situation transporting on pipelines to their respective locations. You recognize most of those names. They're relatively other local gas distribution companies. Our average monthly bill for FY16 was $52.50. That rounded to $53. So we're only about I'd say actually less than $2 above the median for that group, but we do have the highest of that group. You might say, well, why is that? I don't know for sure, but my strong hunch is that the programs we have that are designed to make sure we have a safe and reliable distribution system and the level of replacement we have for our gas pipe in the ground is probably more enhanced than I would say for these other, to some extent, somewhat smaller systems as well. And there is obviously a cost to doing that and to ensuring a safe and reliable system, and I think that shows up. But I would still tend to classify this as being competitive. Maybe not where we would like to be in the rankings, but to some extent it is what it is, and I still think relatively competitive with these other companies. Looking at water, again, really a similar story. Average capital investment, $12 million, $26 million since Century 2. We've added actually $11.60, about 55 cents per year over that period of time. Again, really a period of virtually no increases. Even when we raised rates in 95, I think we only added like 33 cents to the monthly bill at that point in time. $7 of the 12 has occurred since we started Century 2. Water rate comparison, we compare to the local utility districts. We also compare to some regional cities, and this comparison includes Lexington, Birmingham, and Chattanooga. And you can see that our average monthly bill